Friends, good evening to you. I hope we find you well today on this cloudy and rainy fall evening. I hope you're getting some refreshment wherever you're tuning in from. I want to give Dottie a chance to share with us where we are at this point as we come to the conclusion of this class and get ready to begin mission and evangelism this Saturday. Dottie, did you want to give an update as to where we are with that?
Sure. We've got about 60 people, I think, registered for Richard's class right now. If you want to take the course and have not registered, you have until tomorrow to get registered. Then the site is going to go away so it doesn't drive me nuts trying to keep up with everybody. But there is required reading. I think most of it is pretty readily available as far as being ordered. So hope to see a lot of you there. I will ask that anybody who is asking to get credit for this course, that you make sure that you've got the name you registered under listed as your Zoom name, please. And that brings up a subject that we do need to discuss. In the future,
That's my book.
you have got to have your
Sure.
name on the Zoom.
That's it.
Your full name, please. For example, the first class that we had back in September, I had 3 Toms. Only one of them had their last name.
Oh, that was my book.
Yeah. But anyway,
That's my
we're
book.
looking forward to this last class of the fall.
That's my handwriting. That's my book.
And I will be getting certificates out for those that asked for them for this class and also for Cliff's that just finished up within the next couple of weeks. So look for those. If you don't get one, say by mid-November, let me know because I did forget one last time. So, and then we've got lots of classes in the spring.
Yes, we're getting ready to conclude with Richard's final class. We've had a active fall with 3 convocations, and now we're getting ready to finish the 3rd of our CLM courses. And then Richard will offer the 4th of this fall semester. Then we'll go on holiday break, and then we will kick it off in the spring in February with Earl Bradshaw preaching on Saturdays. And then in March, Kerry Wood will offer history and polity on Thursdays in March. I will offer Wesleyan theology in April on Tuesday. And our good friend Cliff will be back in May to teach congregational care and ethics in May. And he will offer that as he did this year, this semester, on Sunday evenings from 6 to 8. So we got an exciting thing that we're looking forward to, but tonight we're drawing the curtain on church leadership and administration. It's been a joy having you in this class, and I hope that you have found it meaningful, and I hope you have gained from it, and I hope that you are moving forward a little more informed and hopefully with a clearer perspective as to what you bring to these roles. We said more than giving you just nuts and bolts, how to, you can get that by reading the discipline. We wanted to give you more a vision of the way that you think of your identity when you serve in these particular capacities, because when you carry that identity to these roles, I think the nuts and bolts will take care of itself. But the one thing that I think that you need that goes deeper than just the how to is the why. Who are you when you bring your gifts and your calling to these tasks? Who are you and what is it that you are called to? And that is what we've tried to provide for you in these reflections, and we're drawing them to a conclusion tonight with ones that I think are fitting for us to conclude with, trustees and finance. I've said throughout that with each of these various groups, there are horror stories that accompany them. And there are certainly horror stories that we have with trustees and finance that we will share tonight that will draw us into the various case studies to think together and think of what to do and what not to do as we approach what it means to serve as God's stewards. But before we dive into this, let's open with prayer and ask for God to bless our time together and to make it fruitful for us. Gracious Lord, I thank you for this past month together. I thank you for this group that has been here with us, and I thank you for the calling you've placed on them. I thank you for the gifts that you have brought within them, and I thank you that as now they're meeting in charge conferences and their calling is getting affirmed, and the next step toward serving you in a way that will strengthen and empower their walk is going to be accomplished. And so we give you praise for what you are achieving in our lives, step by step, moment by moment. Everything that we give to you, including this evening, there is fruit that we will enjoy. And so we thank you for that. And we pray that this next 2 hours together will indeed be productive long after the 2 hours are over, that it will continue to pay rich dividends in our lives. So inspire all that we do, inspire our hearing, inspire our sharing, inspire our embracing of these ideas, inspire most of all our desire to move forward, enabling us and empowering us in a way that will be pleasing to you. We thank you, we honor you, we praise you and exalt you for who you are. In your wonderful name we pray. Amen. Well, the sections we're looking at tonight, we're going to begin with trustees in section 446 of the Book of Doctrines and Discipline. That is the section that we're working through tonight. And I'm going to open with one of the horror stories that I am personally acquainted with. This did not happen to me personally. It did happen to a colleague of mine when I was serving in Kentucky prior to moving to North Carolina in 2011. The first 15 years of my ministry I spent in Kentucky. And one of the classic stories that we heard was that in the Kentucky conference, there was a man who owned a construction company, and he and his son were very prominent in the church, and their legacy had been in that church for many years. His parents had been a part of that church, and his grandparents had been a part of that church, and they continued the legacy. And he, owning that construction company, did a lot for that church. And he did a lot for it in terms of their improvements and additions to the property. Unfortunately, that man had a falling out with the church, and it became increasingly hostile. One Saturday evening, apparently, he and his son went to the church, and before the folks gathered for worship on Sunday, because of this increasing division that was between them, he decided that he was going to take back everything that he and his family had ever given that church. And so he and his son went with their trucks, and they proceeded to take up the carpet. They proceeded to load various items that their families, his parents, his grandparents had donated to the church. And when the people showed up for worship on Sunday, the floor was bare. Various things were taken from the church, and anything that had been apart from his family, he took back. Well, that was one of the model stories of what happens when people just do not have the right understanding of stewardship and the right understanding of what it means when we are managers and not possessors of God's property. The church is not ours. The contents of that church, not ours. If we purchase something and give it to the church, it becomes the church's. I am no longer someone that can make claims on that. The carpet is no longer Steve's. It is now belonging to the church. I have given it to them, and it is now theirs. Had the church really wanted to push the issue, they could have filed criminal charges against him, because think about it. I mean, if I were to come over to your house on a Saturday night and take up the carpet and take various things throughout the house and load them in my truck and drive away, I'm not going to be able to say, well, I gave those to Joe and we had a falling out, so I went back and took it. No, that is going to be considered breaking and entering. It's going to be considered theft. It's going to be considered vandalism. I'm going to have a rap sheet as long as my arm before the night's over. But the church, exhibiting Christ likeness, I have to really commend them for taking the high road in that whole incident. They really just left it in the Lord's hands and took the high road, and did not try to do anything more to what was already a very sad situation. But let's put this in perspective. As Methodist societies were growing, Wesley and his supporters began acquiring properties. And those properties were used as meeting houses and chapels to serve as worship spaces. They began acquiring these spaces so that they could use them for worship. And in 1768, John Wesley produced a sermon that was one that I sent you as the reading this week, because I thought it would really set the tone for how we're to think about this issue. He entitled it "The Good Steward." The Good Steward. And it is such a provocative sermon, even beyond what you might have to say about trustees. It's a provocative sermon for life, because Wesley was convinced that the entirety of our lives should be lived according to stewardship. Our time, our resources, our talents, our efforts, our relationship, our conversations, all the words that we use. I mean, for Wesley, all of this is the way in which stewardship is lived out moment by moment. And you may be interested to know that Wesley instituted in those early days what he called a model deed or trust clause, what we came to know as the trust clause. And why did Wesley institute that? Why did he put that in place? He was concerned for his societies that if they ever departed from doctrine and attempted to utilize the properties that they were acquiring for worship for contrary purposes, and they sharply disconnected themselves from what should be their mission, then the trust clause was Wesley's way to preserve and protect that the connection would remain, that they would remain aligned in mission. And so the model deed or the trust clause was theological in the respect that they would learn that through their handling of the property, they were surrendering it to something bigger than themselves. They did not own the property. They were the caretakers. They were the managers in honor of the kingdom. Now, when we formed the modern committee of trustees, let's be clear that that did not exist in Wesley's day, but we're trying to describe in spirit, at least, what Wesley put in place and the similarities that we would have today. But the Trustees was a modern organization, and they were designed to oversee and protect the titled property that was held in trust by the mission. What was ironic in recent years was that the UMC departed from orthodoxy, which is what the model deed and the trust clause, if you will, were designed to protect. And the irony of it was that the UMC departed from orthodoxy, and then they held hostage those who were orthodox. We were not able to disaffiliate unless we paid exorbitant fees, and some conferences, as you know, didn't even permit them to pay exorbitant fees. And now some of those conferences are involved in various lawsuits, and things have gotten increasingly divisive in recent years. But Wesley would find all of that quite interesting. The model that Wesley put in place in England was carried to the United States by Thomas Coke. And the whole point is that we are stronger together than we are apart. That was the whole point of it. The local church with a worldwide reach. And that was theologically imprinted and ingrained within the mindset of anyone who called themselves Wesleyan or Methodist. It was ingrained within them because stewardship was central to Wesley's theology. We're part of something bigger than ourselves. We do not own this property. It is not ours. We do not possess it. We are the caretakers. We maintain it, we manage it, we safeguard it, the building, the land, the assets. And for Wesley, the model deed or the trust clause was designed to ensure continuity. So long after Wesley was gone into the future, it could ensure that the continuity of what Wesleyan orthodoxy and scriptural allegiance would continue to espouse and support. Now, it does provoke us to consider, because the Global Methodist Church is departing from a Wesleyan idea, which is interesting. It was Wesley's idea to institute the trust clause. It was interesting to me that, because I was a part of the WCA and I remember these conversations quite well. The WCA was very firm in promoting there will be no trust clause. We want people to know on the front end that we're not going to do this. And yet, as vehemently as they were opposing this, they were opposing what was originally a Wesleyan idea that Wesley believed was theological. So it does provoke us to think, how are we going to think as stewards in a new denomination that has disconnected itself from the trust clause because of the corruption that the UMC tarnished it with? I mean, people are so traumatized now by their experience and what we came out of. The trust clause was used as a weapon. It was turned against us, and we were abused by it. We were uh, we were wounded by it, and now as we move forward, we are attempting to jettison it entirely, throw it overboard. We no longer want anything to do with it. But this was a carefully thought out Wesleyan idea. So it does provoke us to think about it and talk about it and ask, how are we going to preserve this idea of guardianship and stewardship when we are holding the title now? We are going to be the caretakers of the title that we possess, and it is promoted as if we are gaining something and taking a step forward. I mean, everywhere you go, everybody says there will never be a trust clause. We aren't bringing that back. We're not doing that ever again, because it was so damaging and it was so corrupted in the time period that we were under it. But I want to take you back to the origins of it and Wesley's original theological thinking that we had to have something that instituted it in such a way where it would be bigger than us. We would be surrendering to something bigger than ourselves, and we voluntarily laid it on the altar. It is the Lord's, and this is the way that we can do it concretely, pragmatically, practical theology, if you will, practical divinity. This is the way in which we can do this in a very concrete way. You don't get more concrete than to say that the deed is not going to be held by the respective church, but it will be held by the community at large to ensure continuity. So it is something for us to think about and consider, particularly because as we're moving forward now after the damage that was done under it in the UMC, it does provoke us to think, how are we going to maintain stewardship in a very different model that is not aligned with Wesley's original theology? I want to make that clear. What we're doing and moving forward to attempt to heal people's wounds from what the UMC did, some people are saying we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater to say that we're not going to return to Wesley's idea because it was so corrupted and so damaged that we don't see any way that we can clarify it and rectify it and remedy it and cure it of all of its deficiencies and restore it back to the place that Wesley believed that it needed to be. Well, another sermon that I had you read was The Great Assize. The Great Assize. What a sermon. One of my favorite from John Wesley. And that's another issue that really astonished me about the UMC. How the UMC could adopt the progressive theology that they ended up adopting when someone like Wesley preached a sermon like The Great Assize. Have you ever read that sermon? Because Wesley pictures in this sermon the ultimate call to accountability. 3 words: called to count. And Wesley is convinced that that is what's going to give our moment by moment life its integrity, because every moment we live is under the shadow of eternity. It's under the shadow that our lives are going to be called to account. There is a measure of a life well lived, and that prevents us from lapsing into relativism. It prevents us from lapsing into anything goes. It prevents us from lapsing into this idea that you're okay, I'm okay. It prevents us from lapsing into this sea where there is no sail or rudder and nothing that anchors us. To say that there is going to be a measure of this life that we're going to be called to account is, for Wesley, what gives every moment of our lives its integrity. Anybody that claims to be bored needs to seriously reevaluate, because for Wesley, every second of our lives is under the shadow of eternity, and it's under the shadow of supreme accountability. Wesley believed that God immensely respected his creation. He respected us because he dignifies us with the honor of saying, Steve, every moment of your life is going to matter. It's going to matter. There's never going to be a moment that's meaningless. There's never going to be a moment that's useless. There's never going to be a moment that's purposeless. There's never going to be a moment that's wasted. Every moment is ultimately going to be held to the great assize, the great supreme accounting, where we will all stand before supremacy and we will give account. And that means that my life is elevated. There's never a moment where my life is laying flat as if it doesn't have any significance. For Wesley, our lives are ignited and charged with supreme significance because eternity casts a shadow on every moment, and Accountability shows that we will ultimately give an account for our time in this world. God cares about how we live our lives. Now, one of the things about serving as a trustee is that you're overseeing church property. I told you about the church in Kentucky and how you go to one extreme where you have people who have a broken understanding of what it means that they are not owners of the church property. They're not possessors of it. And that can go also toward people that want their names put on things. You've seen this before? I mean, as a condition of what they give to the church, whatever it is, they will want their name stapled to it, engraved on it, imprinted on it as a perpetual reminder of who gave that. Well, Wesley would say there's something about that that we might need to think about, because when you give that, it is surrendered to God, it is a gift to God. To put our name up on it as if the honor is some way going to the person whose donation it was, doesn't that detract from the honor of ultimately bestowing this as a gift to God? I mean, could you imagine in the Old Testament if they decided, I'm going to bring this lamb, but I've decided I'm going to brand my name on the side of it before I take it to the priest, simply because I want them to know whose it is and who's given it to them? I mean, that would just seem to diminish the integrity of the gift itself. Wesley would take serious issue with this modern day practice of having to somehow imprint on the side of what we give with our name upon it. And I have heard horrendous stories in my 30 years of ministry, not just with the guy who gave the carpet and other things like that, to say that because my name is on this or my family's name, we're really the true possessors of it. You see, I think therein lies the problem. For Wesley, that's one extreme. And you got to deal with that, because there are some people who just don't have an understanding of what it means to surrender the things that they give. On the other side is when you walk into a church and you look around, and what do you see? You see disrepair, you see neglect, you see lack of care, you see untidiness, you see rooms filled with clutter, you see things that are generally unclean and unkempt and maybe even unsanitary. I've heard of places where parents will take their kids into the nursery. Things are cluttered. I mean, it looks like an indoor trash dump. And that's the other extreme. You got the extreme like the guy in Kentucky who puts his name on something and thinks it's his. Well, he's a little too consumed and obsessive about what he gives. On the other extreme is those who just don't have enough appreciation for the things that are the Lord's, and they have open and visible neglect of the things that belong to God. Wesley would say that you've got to cure both of those with stewardship. Stewardship, rightly conceived, is the cure to both of those things, because stewardship in your discipleship is the mentality that I'm in the world, but I'm not of the world. I am not holding too tightly to accumulation. I am holding to accountability, because in the end, I'm going to have to let go of it anyway. And so, why not be more concerned about my soul, about my relationship with God, about the allegiance and loyalty and integrity of my exaltation that I give the Lord in my moment by moment living? That for Wesley is what we need to devote our lives to. Too often, we are giving with our right hand while our left hand is imprinting our name on what we give, and remembering and taking note that if anything ever happens in this church, I intend to take back whatever my name is on, because I am the true possessor. Or on the other hand, you let the church just fall into disrepair, like it was in the days of Haggai, where the temple was in disrepair, the Lord's house was looking neglected, and this was not what befitted the kind of honor that the Lord should be receiving. And so, what Wesley would say is that proper stewardship is the mentality that we are guardians. We're guardians. We're not owners and we're not possessors. And what we need to think about as particular global Methodists is that without a trust clause, what is going to ensure in the distant, indefinite future our alignment to ministry and mission? Is our faithful covenant that we can profess with one another, is that strong enough? Are we mature enough to hold the deed and claim it and monitor and manage it? Or do we need to return to Wesley's theological understanding that maybe everyone is safer when we surrender this to something bigger than ourselves to ensure that we are taking stewardship to the uttermost? I could say more, but I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to open it up to your questions and to your reflections. What is leaping out at you this evening about Wesley and stewardship and how it pertains in our day to the properties that we safeguard and manage? What are you thinking about? Janice, what's on your mind this evening?
Well, my church is a church that is very labeled with names. Every window has a name or two
Many churches are, yeah.
written on them. And I have always seen that as these are the people who founded our church. These are the people who cared for our church and were good stewards of our church and made sure that it was here for us now. Most of those things appear to be memorials. They are from and birth date to death dates. And to me, that tells me what we've done in my lifetime is when memorial gifts are made in honor of somebody after they die to the church, whatever money whatever we buy with that money or use that money for, we would have those labels put on those things just to say these were given in memorial gift funds for our church. This person cared enough about us and our church that they had people, instead of giving flowers, to give money to our church. And we have always tried to honor those people by putting a label on it. Every hymnal in our church pew has a label in the front that says this hymnal was donated by memorial funds in honor of this person. So I saw that as a respectful way for us to remember the people that built our church and have been good stewards of it and have maintained that it was an important part of their lives. And I know my dad, he didn't do the things he did for our church as trustee, head trustee for many years. He didn't do those things for recognition. And our church wasn't bad disarray. It was in terrible shape. People thought we were shut down for years because the outside just needed painting. And it was the last project my father finished before he died, was the restoration of our church. And he tried to restore it back to some of its original time period states. You know, we went back to its original ceilings and those kinds of things. And anything new we put in it, we tried to make sure that it matched the time period of the church's original building. And we do have a sign in there that my aunt's actually bought, and we put it in the church because he did dedicate a lot of his life and a lot of his time to maintaining that church and keeping it, the floors from falling through and make sure that people could get in the doors without getting hurt. You know, he made sure it was a safe place to worship. And it was an important part of who he was and an important part of his life. And right now, that little sign that's up in that church is the only place I have to see my dad as a memorial. But because he was cremated, my mom has his ashes and we have no headstone yet or any of that. So I like having those names on the church. I don't see them though that they owned the church or thought that they owned the church. My dad most certainly didn't, but that the church honored their memory by their things coming to their money, memorial money coming to the church when they died. How do you see the difference in saying, I own it, it's mine?
I'm sure that there are other ways to see that and conceive of that, definitely so. And I would hope that the case like we saw in Kentucky is not the dominant way in which you see that played out. But I think that overall, through the 30 years I've been in ministry, I've heard more than a few stories about entanglements that arise, disputes that arise over property that has names, engraved upon it. And I think Wesley would find those debates are quite interesting because they propose what really would be a fundamental issue of stewardship on the front end. Whenever we're gifting this, maybe on the front end, we need to have a clarity of ultimately who is being honored ultimately. And not to say that somebody might be able to walk that fine line and balance the side of showing appreciation to one's forebearers and also honoring God simultaneously, and not allowing the former to eclipse the latter. Um, at the same time, there are cases where that understanding is obviously blurred and people don't really reach the clarity that they need to about it. And so we revisit the question about stewardship, and to say how would Wesley have thought through this and what would have been his position. Um, I think for him, he was constantly trying to surrender the use of anything that was God's in terms of worship, in terms of mission, to the larger calling that we are submitting ourselves to, and to have everything visible in that to reflect and express that for John Wesley. That the model deed and the trust clause was just one way that he attempted to do that theologically, because practical divinity for him was concrete ways, tangible ways that we would express this. And by the very visible way in which we look at it, we hear it, we touch it, it would reflect what we believe theologically. And for Wesley, it was a supreme, singular one to whom all of this belongs, and we are managers and caretakers and not possessors. And so I suspect that even though it may be possible to walk those lines, it does require conversation, and it does require people to reflect on that and to be very diligent in thinking about those issues so that there isn't any misunderstanding about it. Uh, I mean, I heard of an issue recently where a church that had acquired handbells 25 years ago, and there were various donors to the handbells that had their names printed on the inside of the handle, and one person's name was not spelled correctly. And nobody ever said anything. Nobody ever heard anything about it. And then 25 years later, the person says they have kept a grudge for 25 years. They have been bitter for 25 years. They've been upset for 25 years because their family's name was not spelled right on the handle of this handbell, and they took it personal, and they have a grievance about it. And I think Wesley would say, well, maybe the first mistake happened 25 years ago when your gift had some kind of stipulation attached to it that there would be a name attached of the donor to the property. If we had just said at the front end, thank you for your gift, this is going to be used in the Lord's honor and for his glory, then it would, it would absolve us of any kind of issues like that. You hear those issues all the time, and I'm sure you guys have your own horror stories about it. I'm just wanting you to realize that these are stewardship issues that Wesley would have us think very carefully and critically about, because for Wesley, he went to the uttermost to try to preserve stewardship in the strongest way. And as I mentioned, he did it with the model deed and with the trust clause, because he wanted in everything that was used for worship and mission that we would realize from the very beginning we're a part of something bigger than ourselves, and we're not going to entangle ourselves in anything that would blur or confuse or inhibit us from understanding that we are caretakers and not possessors. That was Wesley's thinking. As I say, in the modern day now with the GMC, because of the woundedness of the UMC, we've moved away from that. But it does provoke us to ask, how are we going to preserve this continuity if we don't have a trust clause? What is going to be the anchor that ensures that we live as strong stewards as we move into the future? Dottie, what are you thinking about this evening?
Well, I think that the point that Janice made was that I think I heard this right, that the church decided to make these memorials. And I think that's vastly different than, say, someone who's got mega bucks that says, I'll build you a new building if you name it after me. And so there's a different reasoning behind the memorials than there is if somebody is trying to take control of what they donate and how it's done and that sort of thing. And it wasn't really a horror story, but it's something that I will always remember. A church that my sister went to, there was a young lady that was going to be married, and her parents were doctors. They had significant funds, and they said that they would replace the carpet in the sanctuary if they got to choose the color. And they wanted it to
Right,
match the daughter's wedding, you know. And
right.
again, and that's even when the trust clause was in. So it there's just a lot of different circumstances and a lot of tangled webs that we can get into. But I don't really object to the church itself saying, we're using money that was given in honor or in memorial for this person, and this is what we're going to do, and we'll put a plaque or put their name in the hymnal or whatever. So
Yeah, that would be distinguishable, but I think it would still warrant a stewardship reflection, because the moment you do put a name on it, you're honoring someone in the human realm, and you obviously have the question, is this going to detract ultimately from the supreme honor that we give to God singularly? That is something worthy of a stewardship question, but it is certainly distinguishable, as you say, from somebody who would give a donation with demands on the front end. Carol, what are you thinking this evening? Is your microphone on?
Well, I was thinking two different churches, two different friends, and one, they didn't have a trust clause and they were able to vote to disaffiliate, but the other church was basically made to live in fear of disaffiliation, and ultimately voted not to because they did have a trust clause and they wouldn't be able to leave with their church. And so I think when the trust clause was first put in, I don't think anybody anticipated how things were going to turn out. People were going to debate. But scripture is true and always has been, always will be. That the human heart is wicked, and without, without the true influence of Christ, human beings are going to make bad decisions. And so I'm very inclined to think that being tied there because you were tied to the trust clause wasn't, for some churches, wasn't a very good thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was ironic because Wesley instituted it to protect orthodoxy and doctrine, to ensure that churches would not ever utilize the properties for contrary purposes and to promote doctrines that would stray from orthodoxy. I mean, it was ironic, wasn't it, that the UMC was promoting heterodoxy, and yet they held the trust clause, and those that wanted to preserve orthodoxy, we were the ones held hostage. They took the trust clause, turned it upside down, and then used it as a weapon against us. They weaponized it. And we came forward with so much grief and trauma and damage that it was something that we decided that we were going to jettison at the formation of the GMC because of people's terrible experience under it. But it is indeed very central to Wesley's early days of stewardship, and the way that he thought of the way we could live out in a very practical and visible way our stewardship within a place of worship where we're surrendering ourselves to something that is bigger than ourselves. And one of the ways that we do that is to commit to on the front end that we are only stewards and not possessors. So it is interesting and certainly worthy of conversation, and how we're going to continue to maintain continuity as we move forward in the future without such a instrument in place.
Is there some kind of protection for those scenarios, or is that just something that we're not able to do?
What is that again?
Is there some kind of protection, against such scenarios arising again? And because I can see both sides, but at the same time, I also watch people experience a tremendous amount of hurt.
Sure, it was. And now what we're dealing with, though, is on the other side, anyone who feels like that things don't go their way, they can say, we're just going to walk away and go independent. And there really is nothing that would anchor them to a commitment or to a covenant other than their own desire to say we're in or we're out. We're at that side of it now, and we're seeing churches, using the absence of a trust clause in the opposite kind of way. That if things don't go our way, we'll go independent, and there you see is the other side of the spectrum of what happens when you don't have that in place. So there's going to be issues that we're going to have to talk about and think about as the GMC moves forward. Obviously, they were trying to correct one disastrous practice, and by putting something in its place, it's going to produce some other issues, the opposite of what we came out of, but distinctive issues that we're now going to have to, come up with some solutions and remedies to deal with. But for Wesley, I just want you to see that thinking as a steward about these issues and the way that he did it concretely in terms of the meeting houses and chapels that they acquired for their societies and for their ministries, Wesley thought on the very front end, how can we design this in a way that will demonstrate in a visible, concrete way our supreme stewardship. Wesley wanted to do that. He wanted it to be represented in the properties themselves. He wanted their theology to be demonstrated in the concrete, visible, tangible way in which they handled the properties that they used as their meeting houses. So Wesley was a quite thorough thinker and thought very carefully about every detail and wanted the specifics of anything that the church acquired that they were going to be able to use in their ministry or in their work or in the various ways in which the movement was getting carried forward. Wesley wanted to be very careful that their theology was going to be expressed in every meticulous detail. And so I think it inspires us to do the same these days and to think, have similar kind of conversations about stewardship. And we may, end up doing memorials, but we'd want people to understand the theology of stewardship and the theology of what it means to, once these names are imprinted, that ultimately this is God's house, and it needs to be with that understanding. And in cases like we hear people coming back later and holding issues for whatever reason, those are issues that will have to be thought about on the front end, rather than once you get there and they're a landmine and you're dealing with the fallout. Dennis and Denise, what are you thinking about this evening? What's on your mind?
I was thinking if churches of the local community has worked and actually paid for the land and the building and all that, that it would be more of a covenant agreement with the Methodist organization. And if they become in breach of that covenant agreement, that would be like a disaffiliation. They would no longer be a quote global Methodist church. If they still wanted to say they were Methodist, we don't own that. But there could be a covenant, an affiliation type of covenant, but it just not knowing all the theology that you've shared with us already tonight, it just seemed to me unkind to see these folks who were farmers and merchants and that they worked and it was the sweat of their brow that built that church for somebody else to have the title to it.
Yeah, and for Wesley, he would have said that it was an entanglement, obviously, that I think Wesley would have found a conundrum, and we'll get to that when we get to the finance side. That the irony that Wesley was not one that advocated going into a lot of debt, and yet the irony, as you're rightly addressing here, is that nearly all of us here, if our churches got out, we had to pay exorbitant fees, even for North Carolina when we were one of the lower end compared to some conferences. Uh, Wesley would have found that very interesting, that the Orthodox were paying the unorthodox a disaffiliation fee so that we can preserve our orthodoxy. I mean, that is a conundrum. And so you're pushed into a situation there that was unfortunate. Wesley created the model deed and the trust clause to protect and preserve orthodoxy. That was the whole purpose of it, and it was a way to to ensure continuity into the future long after he was gone, that you could ensure that orthodoxy would continue through perpetuity. But when it got inverted, it got turned inside out, it became heterodox, and yet they held the trust, and then we were held hostage by it. And you're right. Those that were held hostage by heterodoxy, I mean, it was really just a sad and tragic situation. But in terms of best case scenario, Wesley would say that stewardship properly conceived you would be doing this in order to ensure that, the strongest protection of perpetuity into the indefinite future, um, for future generations, to ensure that orthodoxy would be the mantle passed on through the ages, and to put that in concrete would be a way to show visibly and tangibly that we are surrendering ourselves to something bigger than ourselves. But as you say, it turned into a monstrosity. That's the only word you can come up with. It becomes something monstrous turned against us. And I think Wesley would have found that very tragically ironic. And the fact that we had to, some of us, go in debt to get out, that would have even furthered the conundrum for John Wesley, to have to go into debt to protect orthodoxy. I mean, these are very ironic and unfortunate scenarios that played out uniquely because of the way that the trust clause became inverted over time, which was a grand and total departure from what Wesley had originally conceived. Did that address your question in full, or did you have a follow-up on that, Carol, or did that address it for you?
This is,
I mean, Dennis and Denise, did that address it for you?
I was thinking more of, instead of holding the property in trust, that it would have been more of a contractual or covenant paperwork. So like if I want to open a Hardee's as a franchise, there's certainly some covenant clause contract in order to keep the Hardee's name on my restaurant. And if I violate that, I can't be a Hardee's. I can name it Denise's restaurant, or I can continue to sell hamburgers, but that I just wouldn't be a Methodist or a United Methodist church without it being that tangible. I think sometimes the congregations might feel like they were being held hostage, especially as during they were trying to separate.
Yeah, you're right. And we'll get to that in the finance discussion. There are a lot of things that ended up developing in the modern era in terms of the way that we do contracts, the way that property holdings, all the legalities and everything that's tied to that. That's all unique to the modern era. And for Wesley, he was working in his day and his time, and with the buildings they were acquiring as meeting places for him on the front end, as they were originating this, he was thinking of ways that they could protect the mission and the ministry, and that these properties were instruments of that rather than the end. They were the means to the end. And for him, he needed to think of ways on the front end to protect and preserve that end, and to ensure that the means were always going to be in continuity and in right alignment with it. And then that's what he designed as the way to do that. Over time, though, a lot of variables have entered in, and we'll get to that a little more when we get to finance. Which added layer after layer of legal issues and property things that made it far more entangled than Wesley would have been able to think in the 18th century. But the bottom line is that, in spirit at least, we can recover what it means to be guardians of sacred trust. That's what Wesley was trying to go after, and he was trying to instill within the Wesleyan mindset this idea of stewardship, and making sure that we're oriented that way, and that the questions we ask and the ways in which we properly integrate all of these various things in the modern day that we are carefully thinking, how does our stewardship apply to this? And then reach some kind of proper theological understanding that we can submit our lives to and say, we're going to honor these people in a memorial, but we're going to recognize that as a church and as a people, we're going to constantly convey that this won't ultimately detract from the singular supreme honor of whose it is. And they keep coming back to that and grounding themselves in that. And for Wesley, that I think would really be the spirit of Methodism, if nothing else, is that you're grounding yourself in a strong stewardship orientation toward life. And the decisions you make as a church may very well implement some decisions that you will find acceptable. But as long as those stewardship questions are guiding you, I think Wesley would say that you'd have his blessing as long as those stewardship questions were always at the forefront. Janice, did you have another question to follow up?
More of a comment, I guess. You know, you say, what can we do moving forward if we don't have that in place? When we created our new church as a Global Methodist Church, we got a new tax ID number. We created new bank accounts. We became a new organization. And in so doing, maybe we should have also written an original bylaws of that organization. And in those bylaws, we can write this part up so that this sanctification and the trust is created, and the property can be owned not by the church as an organization, but can be held in a trust that the church owns, a legal trust. Like Cameron and I don't own this house anymore. The trust, the Gill family trust, owns our house and our cars. Our assets are in a trust because we have a son that has autism, and we had to put our assets in a trust to protect it after we're gone so that he always has a home. And we had to make sure that was taken care of. The same thing could be done for the churches individually, not through the Global Methodist and sharing a tax ID like we did with the United Methodist Church, which gave them ownership of everything. By being our own entities, we can create our own legal trust. And in the stipulation of that trust, detail this Wesleyan doctrine so that it is moving forward with the orthodoxy that you're talking to. Is that an option?
Yeah, I will. Those would be, some possible options. I think that at least at this stage, the wounds are still fresh. They're still fresh for a lot of people. The trauma is still something that we have not gotten over. The whiplash is still, the sting is still sharply felt. And I think that if anybody even hinted of talking about trust at this stage, I mean, people are going to have, panic and chest pains. But I just said it for, we're having educational, reflective purposes here. And I think that, for the interest of the academic, that it behooves us to revisit Wesley's original thinking and what he had conceived and why, and what we would need to do similarly in some respect as we move forward with thinking that would preserve that level of stewardship that Wesley thought was so crucial, particularly in places of worship. And when you think about property and possessions and tangible assets, Wesley believed that there's always the temptation of accumulation and possessiveness. And it may seem innocent, it may seem harmless, but that possessiveness detracts ultimately, for Wesley at least, from the proper idea of surrendering to something bigger than ourselves. And so it is a live thing that I think we need to revisit and at least ask questions about, because Wesley was so adamant about it in his day that it was crucial to preserve that, and that it was a visible way in which you had practical divinity. I mean, it was a way in which it was really expressed in a way that was tangible for everyone. And so the theology was, as it were, something that they could put their five senses to see. And for Wesley, that was really so important for people to understand stewardship. But when it gets turned on you as a weapon, then you are in a very your world is upside down. You've everything has been inverted, and what was down is up, and what was up is down, and what was black is white, and everything just gets reversed. And we were really in an upside down world with the UMC in every way imaginable. And so it presented some unique challenges that we had to solve there because there were really no other options available. And we had to take some options that I think Wesley would have had to hold his nose to accept, going in debt, taking out loans, things like this in order to protect orthodoxy. But we were having to do what we had to do, and in the larger interest of protecting and carrying on the continuity of orthodoxy. But it does provoke us to revisit these questions anew and to see the critical foundations that Wesley put stewardship on, and believe that if they weren't there, then you were going to be building the scaffold on things that were not on a proper foundation. Any other COLM candidates have any questions or any follow-up reflections? Otherwise, I'm going to let our friend Cleve have a say here. Cleve, what's on your mind this evening?
I'd like to take a moment to reflect on section 6 of the paperwork, where the scripture frames the mission. Sola scriptura, sola doctrina. Scripture first, doctrine second. It is a very interesting Old Testament passage because the Hebrew spirit is ruah, God's breath. Lord is Adonai, and you cannot do anything without God's breath. So it's God's breath that forms the mission. And the mission is that the Board of Trustees, that they are God's gatekeepers, God's guardians, God's stewards, and when they do their work well, the church can do her work freely. Souls can be saved. That was the mission of the Wesleys, to save men's souls. The lives can be changed, and the kingdom of God can be advanced. My dear friends, Scripture first. Scripture
What it's about.
first.
And Zechariah 4:6, not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord. And when the Spirit is breathed upon us and among us, and you are consecrated and anointed, to be consecrated means you're set apart. You're set apart for the Lord's use. You become the Lord's instrument. You become the Lord's vessel. You become the Lord's property. You have been branded, sealed by His Spirit. The way we brand things, the Lord puts His stamp on us. We are the Lord's property. And Wesley tried to instill and ingrain that within his people, that they would have a very deep and pervasive sense, not of what they have, but of whose they are. And when they got that straight, then they would have all the security and all the confidence and all of the steadiness that life affords, when you can move forward with the strength that knows that I'm held, I'm possessed, I am guarded by one who claims me, considers me a treasure. I am the Lord's treasured possession. And for Wesley, that set the tone for everything else. And so when you live as a treasure, you can have a rightful perspective toward all the treasures that you have around you. They won't be for you where you find your security, because you'll know where your security is not by might, not by power, but by the Lord's Spirit. Well, a lot to think about there. But Wesley was certainly one to put forward stewardship in a invigorating way. And I think when you look at those sermons, the Good Steward, the Great Assize, and as we'll see in the next section, the use of money, these are provocative sermons for Wesley as he's attempting to navigate what it means to live as people who are caretakers and managers rather than owners. He was meticulous in that, put forward in ways that I think some might be astonished by today, but it certainly provokes us, and it really, I think, pushes us toward having some conversations that I think will end up uh, making us stronger in the end. We will benefit from those conversations. Well, at 7:25, why don't we take a 5 minute stretch and relax, and give you a chance to get some refreshment, and we'll come back at 7:30 and we will close out our last section tonight on what is the Finance Committee in the GMC. We'll see you at 7:30. Hey, I hope everybody was able to get a little refreshment and get prepared as we make our stretch run into a fantastic finish. Thank you again for these last few weeks together. I hope they have been meaningful for you and have provoked you to revisit some of the great ideas that Wesley put in place for us to consider and some of the practices that he instituted that certainly gives us some things to think about these days. I think Wesley was always one to strive for balance. I don't think that he was one to quickly dismiss something that we would have as a modern practice, but he would bring reflection and he would always ground it in strong scriptural authority and ensure that that is always our guide. That's always our beacon. And as we said before, as we said throughout, the interest for Wesley is what we call practical divinity. Practical divinity. And what that meant for Wesley is that there was always a risk for him. He saw that people could make Christianity something that would be thought of in the mind and entirely abstract and something that just it never really, it's nebulous and indescript and indefinite and it occurs in the deep terrain of the mental. But Wesley thought this has got to be expressed, it's got to be visible, it's got to be tangible, it's got to be practical, it's got to be recognizable. And these last two are the ways in which stewardship lives that out, expresses that, embodies that, it makes it incarnate. In the way that Jesus became flesh, stewardship is what takes property, possessions, material things, money, and it lives it out, practical divinity, in ways that are not abstract, in ways that are entirely tangible and entirely visible. Now, this last section that we're looking at this evening comes to us from section 447 in your book of Doctrine and Discipline. I don't know if you are an avid admirer of Billy Graham and the impact that he has had in our lifetime, but he was certainly one of my heroes. And I remember one thing that he said that I think Wesley would have appreciated tremendously was Billy Graham said that there are only two things that he needs to see in order to reveal what a person really believes about God. I mean, a person may have quite technical theology, and they might believe a lot of things that are quite extravagant, and they may have a theology that would be impressive academically. But Billy Graham said that all I need to see are two things to reveal what you really believe, and that would be your calendar and your checkbook. He said, because how you use your time and how you use your money reveal what you really believe. Now, Wesley would find that deeply profound because Billy Graham is speaking in terms of practical divinity, calendars and checkbooks. I mean, that's palpable. That's visible. You're not in the realm of the abstract. I may say that there's one and one singular supreme God, one God that we should give our lives to and to honor and to serve and to love and to put first. And then you look at the way I use my time and the way that I spend my money and the way that I use my possessions. And you may say, I'm not so sure that your actions really substantiate what your doctrines profess to be. That's what Wesley meant by practical divinity. So it was in his very early years of the revival, 1744, when he preached the sermon, The Use of Money. And it was the way in which he's getting to this very practical way in which stewardship is lived out and expressed. A stewardship of wealth, a proper way in which we handle the possessions that we have in this world. Now, remember that in the 18th century, there was rapid economic change going on in Wesley's time, and his interest was to sanctify the use of wealth and to frame it in the identity around this foundation of discipleship. And the foundation, he believed, is good stewardship. Stewardship in its most critical foundations. And that's why I said, in the use of money, is to read it alongside the great assize, because he believes that ultimately we will give an account of our entire life, everything that I had access to, and everything that I had under me in this world that I could have used as a witness. I'm going to be held accountable for it. And it's going to be a supreme and ultimate accounting. And for Wesley, give an account of your stewardship is essentially what you did in classes and bands and societies. How is it with your soul? This is where you were able to grow in your stewardship and mature in your stewardship, and you guarded against waste and unwise expenditures, and you aligned your life consistent with the honoring of God and with the call of the Great Commission. So there was a clarity and a consistency that Wesley believed that stewardship brings to life that really touches every practical and concrete aspect of it. Now, all through Genesis through Revelation, Wesley would say that two things are held side by side: mercy and accountability. They're not in tension with each other. The mercy seat and the judgment seat are one throne. They're one and the same. It was C.S. Lewis said that mercy detached from justice becomes unmerciful, because mercy that is not ultimately brought into accountability would become unmerciful. And so we've got to be held accountable to the way in which we receive mercy and respect mercy and honor mercy and cherish mercy and live in such a way where our lives embrace mercy rather than disregard it or ridicule it or show disrespect toward it. The mercy seat and the judgment seat are one and the same for John Wesley. And so when you talk about finances, so often in life, finances really create dependence rather than empowerment. And Wesley believed that we should earn all we can. We should save all we can. We should be good stewards of our work. We should be good stewards of our talents. We should be good stewards of our gifts. We should be good stewards of our effort. We should be good stewards of our investment and the way that we devote ourselves to the things we do, and honor our labor and work as if we're working before the Lord, earning all we can, saving all we can, and giving all we can. Wealth generates generosity. And so Wesley encouraged that, work hard to earn honest wages, because you were generating the capacity for empowerment. You were generating the capacity to spreading the kingdom. Now, it's interesting that in recent years, there was a book written that I think Wesley would have found quite interesting. The book was entitled When Helping Hurts. How to Alleviate Poverty Without Hurting the Poor was the subtitle. I don't know if you've read this book, but when it came out a few years ago, it sent shockwaves through the evangelical Christian community. because in that book, there were a number of statistics about the kind of help that really does those who are in need a disservice. It enables rather than empowers. And the book was a way in which it got our attention to realize that we need to be very critical and evaluative about the kind of things that we're doing in our help, because some helping hurts, and in our interest to alleviate poverty, sometimes we enable it and we don't empower those who we're giving to, but we enable them and we ultimately do nothing to reverse or to redeem their situation. Wesley would find that quite provocative, because there is senses when we can enable rather than empower. And so for Wesley, part of what we do when we think about the use of the way we channel our wealth, and we use it as a vessel, and we use it as an instrument, and we use it as a stream in which God's work is getting done, we're doing it reflectively, we're doing it wisely, we're doing it judiciously, we're doing it industriously, we're doing it with our minds applied to the best of our ability to ensure that we're not doing anything that would be a reckless expenditure, that we're not doing anything that is enabling, but we are empowering. And so he cared greatly about how the wealth that a Christian community generates, how that wealth was utilized in the furtherance of the kingdom. And so I said in the last session, it does produce a conundrum for Wesley that we had to take a significant debt in order to protect orthodoxy by paying exorbitant fees to disaffiliate. That was an unfortunate thing. Wesley would have been more like Dave Ramsey in cautioning us against taking on high levels of debt. He would have told us to approach such things with great caution. And yet we were in a situation where we had no other option. Either it was to do that or remain trapped by an institution where we were held hostage and heterodoxy was dominating. So for Wesley, the issue of finance and the issue of how we utilize our wealth in the interest of the kingdom, for him, are critical stewardship questions. They are foundational stewardship questions. Now, it's important to say at the onset, there were no finance committees in Wesley's day. That did not exist in Wesley's day. They did not write policies. There were no audit procedures. There were no budget templates like we're, coming up with in a lot of our churches, designing budgets for 2026. That did not exist in Wesley's day. To think about how churches utilize estates and wills and pensions and investments and insurance and payroll and regulatory compliance and nonprofit law and tax rules and donor guidelines, electronic banking, digital giving, cybersecurity. All of these things are modern day elements that are tied up to what we do. And finance committees have to be familiar with all of these things. For Wesley, they funded chapels, they supported preachers, and they had generated financial growth in what was largely an agrarian economy, but it was becoming increasingly automated, and there were significant levels of industry and wealth that were being generated. And so it presented new questions for John Wesley, which is what inspired these sermons dealing with concrete reflections on the use of money, the use of wealth. How, as a believer, should you approach it? How, as a Christian community, should you think about it? Because when we're generating wealth for the interest of the kingdom, we may have things in which we're having to debate. How much reserve do we carry over? I mean, that would have been a critical question for John Wesley. Some churches maintain huge reserves, and I think it really would provoke us to ask the stewardship question when we maintain these tremendously sized reserves. Is this reflective of our trust? Is this reflective of our faithfulness? Or is this reflective of our insecurity? Are we maintaining these reserves as a sense to protect ourselves rather than to trust God in the work that we've been called to? How we maintain reserves would be a very significant question for John Wesley. Transparency of our wealth and the clear documentation, having checks and balances in place. Those would be issues for John Wesley. Some of these issues are going to be new for us and entirely unique to our modern day, but we can relate to the spirit of what Wesley was about, and we come full circle to where we started this course 4 weeks ago. We're coming full circle because we said that in each of these groups, whichever ones you're on, leadership, council, nominations, SBRC, trustees, finance, whichever one you're on, we said that for Wesley, Christian conferencing is a means of grace, and it can be formative and transformative. That certainly applies to trustees and finance. These are touchy subjects. And when you get to property and finance, we all have stories in our churches where some of the most heated conversations tend to be over possessions, property, and money, don't they? That tends to be the place where people get the most heated, the most divisive, and you can have significant wounds that emerge from those two groups in particular. And that's why I think Wesley would say, here is the importance of Christian conferencing, transformative and formative. And these two groups in particular, as we come full circle now, where we can grow together, we can mature both in our personal faith and as a collective body of believers as we become more aware of what it means to live as stewards. What does it mean to live as God's gatekeeper and God's guardians? What does it mean that we are appointed to preserve and protect and carry forward God's mission and to cherish his scriptural revelation of what he's given to us in his identity, of how he's revealed himself to us? How we do this tangibly in practical divinity, in concrete ways, in the way that we talk about these things, the way that we converse in dealing with property and finance, these are certainly critical areas, no doubt about it. And the way that we can echo in spirit Wesley's scriptural understanding is that we can bring that orientation to what we do. Certainly, many things that we're going to be doing in the modern world are different. There are a lot of instruments that we can utilize that Wesley would have known nothing about. He would have had no access to those kind of things. But he would, in spirit, if he were transported by time machine to the 21st century, he would bring the very same mentality. And he would say, let me caution you, before you do anything with the wheel, before you do anything with these investments, before you do anything with this donation, ask yourself, what does it mean to be a steward? What does it mean that we're God's caretakers? How are we to honor God? And how are we to become vessels through this medium that we have been given as a blessing to carry forward God's honor? These conversations are formative and they're transformative. And it would behoove us to be aware of that on maybe a higher level in trustees and finance because of the history of what those two groups typically produce. There are certainly stories in all of these groups, as we've shared throughout this course. We've shared our stories and our experiences. And there are probably more stories that I have heard in 30 years about people who are wounded over something to deal with property or church finances than any other area. Because those are the areas that strike at the heart of how we live. And that's why Billy Graham said, in the end, we will measure what we really believe about God, about how we show our allegiance and loyalty to God through our calendars and through our checkbooks. I firmly believe that. Billy Graham was also one you may be interested to know that did not believe that the New Testament espoused tithing. He didn't see that the New Testament discussed tithing, and so he believed that what the New Testament calls us to is to be generous givers and to give with cheerful hearts, and that when the Holy Spirit possesses us, we have a mentality that is inspired and transformed to handle wealth differently than we would if we were not transformed. I don't know what your ideas are about that, or if you would agree with Billy Graham on that matter, but I think we can all agree that God calls us to covenant. And we're called to covenant to remain faithful and to be consistent in the way that we maintain covenant. And what Billy Graham and John Wesley would agree with is that you maintain that covenant in practical, concrete, tangible, visible ways. It takes it out of the realm of the mental and the abstract and into the realm where it is identifiable and visible. And when we're talking about property, when we're talking about money, when we're bringing these stewardship questions at the heart of what we do and what we decide, it really inspires and invigorates these questions. And it takes us to a level where Wesley thinks we will think more creatively, we will think more imaginatively, we will think ultimately more sacredly, and in ways that really we should be doing. When sometimes the temptation is to be reductionistic in the way that we think about these, and we carry the mentality of the world uh, to the ideas of the way the church operates, and we apply those ideas in the world. I've said that when we talked about nominations committee, that we often would nominate people who had talents in worldly occupations. And I've often heard people say, oh well, we're going to nominate the new finance chair or the new treasurer because they worked in finance, or they worked in banking, or they worked in uh, mutual funds, or this person knows a lot about managing wills and estates. They'd be a wonderful finance chair. Well, maybe, but Wesley would say before you start asking for accounting degrees to interview for the finance committee, make sure people know what it means to be a good steward. Make sure they know what it means that we are caretakers and not owners. Make sure they know what it means that we are guardians and not possessors. Other gifts will fall into place. But for Wesley, these two things are so critical because they're like magnets continually pulling us for our allegiance and for our attention. And we've got to return back to the notion that this is not about accumulation, it's about accountability, and ultimately that I am accountable to the supreme Savior who has imprinted me as a treasure. And when I learn to think of myself as a treasure, then I will view all the other things that in life are competing to be a treasure. I will view them rightly and appropriately. Well, more can be said, but I think that's sufficient. I'm going to open it up to you. We've covered a lot of ground this evening, and what we keep coming back to is stewardship and how that is what uh, is woven like a thread throughout the care of property and the care of finances. And it will ultimately inform and transform how we manage these things within the confines of a believing community. What are you thinking about this evening? We'll give first crack to our CLM candidates first. Any of our CLM candidates have a question? Dan, what's on your mind this evening?
For my team.
Hey, Steve, this is James Swafford. I'm sitting here with Pastor Daniel. I was wondering if you could speak for a moment about the annual audit requirement of the finance team, and specifically what I'm wondering is who is allowed to conduct that audit? Does it need to be somebody apart from the finance team? Can we have somebody in the church but not on the finance team? And what specifically, how do we conduct it and how do we document it, I guess, are my questions.
You know that when we were part of the UMC, it was an annual requirement that we had, and it is certainly strongly urged that we continue that practice in the GMC. Although, at least for this charge conference, it is not in the paperwork this year. We're not asked in the paperwork this year. If you've had a chance to fill that out and see that, there's not a question in there, did your church conduct a financial audit in the past year? But it is strongly urged that you do. And generally, what was recommended that it would be a person that would be independent of the finance team that could, reflect a high level of accountability to the process. And really what you're auditing is it's an auditing of processes is what you're auditing, is how things are done. How is the counting done? How is the inputting of the intake done? How are the deposits done? Everything from the point of collection to the point of registering and deposits. Every step of that, you're looking at accountability, and is this properly guarded, and is there good oversight of it? And the auditing of the processes is essentially what you're always wanting to strive for, the highest level of transparency and clear documentation. That's what you're striving for. And of course, what the GMC recommends is that if you could even bring in a professional CPA to do it, that would really yield integrity to the process and show the strongest level of accountability. If your church was willing to make an investment like that, there are certainly very good CPAs who could do that and would produce a very thoughtful assessment of your processes. And I know that the unspoken word when we were UMC was that technically they ask for you to do it every year, but the unspoken word was that most churches did it every other year. They did it every other year. And when they turned in the report, the years in between, they really were just reporting what had been done in the previous year. They did it every other year. And most churches that I knew of were only doing it every other year. We did it both ways. I've done it every year. Sometimes we would do it every other year. And we would have somebody other than a person on the finance team do that for us. And we're thinking this year about bringing in an accountant to do it. We hired an accounting firm and we disaffiliated. They were a very important consultation for us through that process. we were very fortunate that we received advice from them, not only legal advice, but we also got sound accounting advice too. As we were alluding to earlier, Janice was mentioning about, all the tax information and everything. We wanted to make sure all of that was done correctly. And so we hired an accounting firm to ensure that every step was done right. And we talked about this year doing the audit and having them do it for us, to yield the highest level of integrity to the process. But if you've got people in your church capable of doing it and qualified to do it, that would yield integrity to the process, what you're striving for is transparency and clear documentation. That really are your two prevailing goals: transparency and clear documentation. That everything is multiple levels of checks and balances at every step of the process, and that you're ensuring that what is received is treated with good stewardship, and that it is honored as managers and caretakers, with the highest level of accountability attached to it. So how you do that, will vary from congregation to congregation. But if you are striving for transparency and clear documentation, um, then I think you're meeting the objectives that are being uh, produced there in our book of doctrine and discipline. It's wanting churches to aim for that and to try to attain that. Um, and to ensure that when you do your audit and when you chart each level of checks and balances, that you are documenting them. You're showing anybody that wants to know the process. This is what ensures that at every level of the process, that we are of the utmost accuracy and of the utmost integrity. And then that enables people to really have a sense of confidence in the organization that they're a part of, that everything is done transparently, everything is done with nothing held back, nothing concealed. And people are much more secure when they know their community is operating that way. I mean, I've heard stories on the other side, as I'm sure you have too, of processes that are not really representative of the highest form of transparency. Uh, Family members, counting the money, and people who are related to each other, who are in appointed positions, that are, in positions where they're handling funds and such. That's not good, and that's not what the discipline calls for either. You'll see the requirements the discipline calls for, and what it's striving for is the highest level of integrity, so that nobody could call the organization into question, because you and I both know that most of our work is trying to clear the territory, to just clear out all the clutter of all of the bad suspicion that people have, that we don't operate with the fullest integrity even before we can even get to the work. We've got to clear all of that first, because there is just such a precedent of things that go before us, where there have been bad incidents and bad examples that are well publicized. And always the bad incidents seem to get the front page, and everybody hears about them. They hear about the treasurer that embezzled. They hear about the pastor that was taking money. They hear about it, and we all get colored in the same. So part of what we do is we're having to go the extra mile to show that we are going to do the opposite of that. We're not going to do anything questionable. We're not going to do anything that would hint of impropriety. And we are going to always put transparency at the forefront of everything we do. So if you're cautious about that, and you're making that a priority, then you're hitting the mark of what the discipline is advising. You're hitting that mark.
One follow-up, Steve, on that. That was helpful. Thank you. And we do have somebody internally, not on the finance team, that is qualified if he'll do it. I hope he'll do it. He's a certified financial planner I'm thinking about. But anyway, I understand that the main thing we want to test here is our policies and our controls around handling money and that kind of thing. Do you typically see as part of these audits combing through a transaction history of the last year or anything like that, or is that a little too far?
Well, maybe it's probably good to have the policies on the front end so that you won't have to do a lot of that work on the back end. Um, to have good policies in place for how things are going to be handled. Um, Typically, what we try to do is we try to have, in good Wesley fashion, concrete receipts attached to everything, so that if there is ever any question, particularly in the automated age where we can pay now with iPhones and we can pay with credit cards and I mean you can tithe with with Easy Pay, and I mean, so many things are now in the cloud, as it were. So we've got to go the extra mile to get into the realm of the concrete. And for Wesley, he would say, great that you have the cloud, and great that you can use Easy Pay and Easy Tithe, and great that you have your iPhone and iPay. Great that those things are available, but you'd better find ways to attach tangible, concrete records so that you can have as you say, an order throughout of transparency and clear documentation. Um, and when that can be substantiated, people are going to feel a lot more cautious and a lot more comfortable. Because in the automated age, I mean, so much now is getting transacted through wires and through clouds, and you don't see it, but it's happening. And Wesley was all about getting things in the concrete, about getting things in the tangible, about getting things substantiated that you could put your hand to, and that you have to go the extra mile when it comes to finances. You have to. Uh, I mean, I read a story recently about a church treasurer just down the road from us, not a Methodist treasurer, but she embezzled six figures from a church in Greenville, North Carolina. I don't know if y'all heard about that story. It wasn't that many months ago when I read about it. Had her picture in the paper. She was the sweetest looking grandmotherly type. Nobody would have ever suspected her. And she did it over the period of about 15 years. And I guess the church was taking in, a great deal of resources where she could, take $8,000-10,000 under the table and nobody would notice it a year. So that at the end of 15 years, she had eclipsed the six-figure mark before she was finally caught. And, in a church where you are meticulously documenting, looking over one another in love, providing checks and balances. I'm not going to say that that's going to, thoroughly insulate you from any of these kind of issues, but you're certainly going to go further to protect yourself than you would otherwise. And Wesley believed that in terms of property and wealth, we've got to attach the highest level of safeguards. We've got to go beyond. It may seem excessive to people. It may. And I appreciate your question. You say, is that going too far? I think Wesley would say you really can't go too far in terms of your protections, in terms of your transparency. If you're going to err on the side of caution. I think that'd be good advice. If you're going to err financially, err on the side of caution. Don't worry about doing too much, but worry about doing too little. That's probably
Mhm.
good advice. That's probably good advice.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that because you stated it quite well. You said, is that going too far? And I think Wesley, knowing how meticulous he was,
Mhm.
he would say you're better to err toward caution, because finances and property, I mean, it's just, it's a magnet. It is. It just is. And even the best of us will find ourselves accommodating and compromising, and sometimes making decisions that are less than the best, um, than if we were striving for full transparency and clear documentation and accountability. Yeah. Well, while the others of you are thinking, I'm going to let my buddy
Thank you.
Cleve dive in here. Cleve, what is on your mind, my friend?
First, Steve, I want to thank you for letting me be part of this. You truly are my best friend.
I've loved having you. I have.
Well, I'm not going anywhere fast. I'm 75, so I slow down a little bit. Your document on Article 5 on the spirit behind the structure is brilliant in its summary, because the scripture in this case is 2 Corinthians 8:20 through 21.
Mm-hmm. That's
And
right.
this time, instead of I'm going to read it, since you're the instructor, would you please share for us and my fellow colleagues what are the thoughts behind that? Because it's really
Yes.
quite brilliant.
Yeah. Paul told the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 8:20-21, if you're looking for a biblical foundation, and I'm glad you reminded me of that, we want to avoid any criticism of the way that we administer God's gifts. For we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of Lord, but get this now, but also in the eyes of men.
Yep. Yep.
That's revolutionary right there.
It
That's
is.
revolutionary. And I do believe, in my humble estimation, that right there is your scriptural foundation for auditing. It's your scriptural foundation for transparency. It's your scriptural foundation for maintaining the highest integrity. And Paul would agree, we'd better err on the side of caution. Think about doing too much before you think about doing too little. I'm glad you reminded me of that, because that's a critical scriptural uh, passage there that I think that really captures it in a profound way. We're
Yep.
doing what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of people. I mean, I think, well, God knows what I'm doing. God knows what I'm thinking. I can keep sloppy records. If we're going to be honorable to the gift, we're going to, I like it, we're going to take pains to do what is right. It's not always easy to do what is right. It's going to take extra effort to make receipts. It's going to take extra effort to make extra records. It's going to take extra effort to do the documentation, but it is going to be the pains to do what is right. I find that quite provocative.
Yeah. Well done, Steve. Well done.
Thank you for reminding me of that. Anybody else? Something leaping out at you about this, Dottie? What's on your mind? What are you seeing here tonight?
Well, I was just going to take note that Linda had a question in the chat that I think is probably something that a lot of churches have dealt with, where they've had apparently the council chair did not think there was a need for auditing and all of that sort of thing. And I don't know how you handle that sort of thing, and I don't think she does either. You know, how you fix someone that thinks that they're not doing anything wrong, and they probably are not. But you've got to be able to be accountable to your church.
Well, you do, and I think that we could certainly go back to Paul's word in 2 Corinthians 8:20-21, which I find to be a quite igniting word for me. That it is worth the extra pains, and we're striving not only in what God sees, but in what our fellow brothers and sisters see. And we live in a world where there is, unfortunately, a lot of duplicity and impropriety around us. And unfortunately, uh, even the best of us are going to be guilty by association. We're going to be guilty by association because they're going to say, I know how you are. I know how people like you do. And so we've got to go the extra mile to distinguish ourselves because we don't want to be guilty by association, and we want to take the pains of doing what is right to say we're going to, because God's honor it really is rightfully receiving this, and it is respectful of our brothers and sisters, and we're going to dignify you with the pains of doing what is right to show you that we're going to be the kind of community that is going to go the extra mile to ensure that we're transparent, and that we do the most in terms of documentation to ensure that things are done in the right kind of propriety. Uh, sure, that may be an honest person, it may be a trustworthy person, but you have to, you really do, you have to show by visible, concrete, tangible actions that you're upholding the highest propriety. I mean, here you're retreating into the abstract again to say, well, I know that I'm honest, and God knows that I'm honest, and that's good enough. Well, it really isn't, because scripture calls us to that high form of stewardship. Wesley saw it, Billy Graham saw it. It is certainly there. The highest form of propriety, which is always tangible, it's always outward, it's always expressive and visible. And I love the way Paul describes it. I mean, sometimes it is a pain, literally a pain in the noggin, to go the great distance to ensure that this is done in a way that has the utmost integrity. I want to do things that are painless, but if it's going to be done right, at least for Paul, he says that, sometimes doing the right thing is worth the honor of taking the pain of doing what is right, and showing by our actions. We could be 1 mile kind of people, but Jesus calls us to be 2nd mile kind of people. And we're going to give witness to him in a way that goes that 2nd mile, when we're going to be straining and striving in the process. But sometimes taking pains to do what is right is the honorable thing to do. And I would share with your brother that, here's scriptural inspiration for us. We are certainly not calling your character into question, or in any way undermining the work that you're doing, but we are saying that in order for us to have a witness of the utmost integrity, we want to be a people. We do, to take pains to do what is right. It is what we're called to do. It's what we're called to be. Make your friend a shirt that says 2nd mile treasurer, and let him know, here's an honorable compliment to you, my friend. You are just getting a promotion as a 2nd mile treasurer this year in 2026. You're going to run that 2nd mile for us, and we're going to cheer you on, and we're going to be there right with you, being 2nd mile in all that we do to ensure we live up to this high calling. Um, so I think that too often we kind of retreat into the abstract, and Wesley was always trying to prevent people from doing that. He did not want people retreating into the abstract and into the private and into the reclusive hideaway of your inner hearts and feelings to say, me and Jesus, we got our own thing going. Wesley would say, we got to bring this out public where everybody can see what you and Jesus have got going, so that witness can be tangible and visible. And sometimes it will be pains to do what is right, but it will be worthy, and it will be right. And we will know that in the running of that second mile, we will cross that finish line, and we will hold our head high, knowing we've honored God. God has given us to be the kind of people who believe doing right is worth that. To honor God is worth that. I find it interesting, and I'll you know, I remember years ago, I stumbled into this Bible study where a pastor was talking about Jesus's call to discipleship. And he was trying to show his class something that would, get them thinking. And he brought this image from the movie Glory. Y'all remember that movie? Very good movie. With Matthew Broderick and Denzel Washington. And there was a scene where one of the military commanders is talking to his brigade, and he is speaking to them sternly, really, as a leader, in terms of what it meant to live up to who they were and what they represented. And so he showed this scene, and he said, "This is a picture of your calling. And this is a picture of, what it means to respect the integrity of what it means to be a disciple." Well, I appreciate that, brother. But here's what I would say. When I didn't realize this until I had Ben Witherington at Asbury, and he said, before Jesus ever called anybody into discipleship, he always fed them first. And I find that interesting. If you backtrack, you'll always see that Jesus does something to feed the person that he is going to call. And he shows on the front end, before I ask you to do anything, I'm going to show that I am worthy of your devotion. I'm worthy of it. I'm worthy of whatever commitment you're going to bring. I'm worthy of whatever uh, sacrifice you're going to make. I'm worthy of whatever uh, pains to do right that you're going to accept. I am worthy of it. And in the end, you're not going to look back on it and think, wow, I paid a heavy cost. You're going to look back on it and say that it was worth that and more, because he was worthy. And I think that's an important thing for us to carry in this before we get to talking about the pains of doing right, is to let people know that whatever we do to be right, God is worthy of that investment. God is worthy of our meticulous thought. And that's why Wesley took great care in all that he did. Some people found him, kind of wound tight and all the rest of it. But hey, you got to hand it to the guy. He was trying the best that he knew how to live up to the one that he thought was worthy of our high calling. So I would stress that, and find ways that we can teach that and promote that and give witness to that, and say that in the end, that whatever great pains that you have endured, that in the end, you're not thinking what all the great pains were, but in the end, you can think that was worthy. I mean, isn't that the point of Jesus's parable about, how in the end, those that came late got as much as those that came early, and those that were there early started grumbling and complaining, when really they should have been thinking, you know what? We shouldn't envy those who came late. We should really look upon them and think, wow, if you only could have been here when we were and served as long as we did, you didn't get to serve as long as we did. You didn't get to enjoy the master in the vineyard as long as we did. Jesus was revealing a mentality in that parable, a mentality that too often we calculate the great pains. And at the end, when the harvest comes, all we can think about was, wow, that was sure was a scorching heat back there, wasn't it? Rather than to think it was an honor to serve beside the master back there. I kind of forgot about, the time. I forgot about the weather. I forgot about the conditions. I was just overjoyed at the fact that I was in partnership with the master. I think that Jesus wants to bring us there, and maybe even though we may be giving great pains for honor, our thought is not consumed by that kind of thinking. Are you following me? We're thinking more of the one whose honor is worthy to live up to and live into. And so that's what we're trying to espouse here, really, with all of these things. The stewardship ultimately is living with the mentality that the one that I am serving is worthy of my stewardship, worthy of what I'm giving, worthy of what I'm devoting, worthy of everything that I'm dedicating. And in those moments where there's great pains to do right, worthy of that too. And in the end, I will be more aware of the worthiness than I will be of whatever the pain was that might have been part of what got me there. Dan, what are you thinking, my friend? Or is it your team that has a question?
We have to.
Hey, Steve, more question for you. I'm going to read a couple sentences out of the Book of Doctrine and Discipline, and I just want you to comment on how they work
Okay.
together. So from 446, which is Board of Trustees, and I'm looking at this is 5D. The trustees, subject to the direction of the charge conference, shall receive and administer all bequests made to the church, receive and administer all trust, and shall invest all trust funds of the local church. From section 447 of the Finance Committee, the Finance Committee shall oversee the stewardship of financial resources. So what is the relationship between the Board of Trustees and the Finance Committee when it comes to the administration and investment of endowments and trust?
That is an excellent question, and one that came up in our church just last week with a very similar issue. And both of those teams, as the discipline calls for, are working in partnership and working together with another level of checks and balances brought in, where the investment itself is something that the trustees will be the guardians of, whereas the finance team is also going to be a part of how that record keeping is done, of how the transparency and the clear documentation is handled. But you do have this distinguished in terms of levels of authority that are distinguished so that you have checks and balances between the two. And it is the trustees who are the guardians of that trustee investment, but it is the finance team that does handle the transparency, the record keeping, the documentation when it is presented at meetings and such, like council meetings, and you look at those funds. The finance chair will be the one who has that, but the trustees are the ones who are the appointed guardians of that. And so I would say that those groups are better in rooms together, talking together, working together, serving in partnership together. Um, and when that is happening, as I say, these groups are new. This didn't exist in Wesley's day. But what we're carrying over is the spirit where Wesley called for transparency, documentation, and checks and balances. And you'll see between the trustees and finance, some of those things that are a little surprising to people. They'll think, wow, I thought the finance group would handle that, but it's under the trustees, but not totally uh, uh, separated from the finance team. But it is something that is under the auspices of what the trustees would handle. And that came up in our church just last week, a issue related to that. And we had to get input from both groups, the trustees and the finance team. So I think, just in your church, if you didn't know that before, and maybe the finance team was handling all of that, don't think, oh no, we've been operating it with impropriety. you can work toward trying to integrate some of these ways in which they're just trying to advocate for the highest level of propriety and integrity. Um, and some people just may not be aware of it, and they're doing the best they can with what they had at the time. But these are put into place because they do believe that, because of experience and reflection and thinking about what would best serve churches legally and just in terms of ethics, uh, that to have two governing bodies of the church overseeing this. I mean, here's the old creed: two heads are better than one. Well, there you see it coming into play there. Striving for the spirit of Wesley to bring into uh, oversight and guardianship multiple ways in which you will say this has passed through the gatekeepers in multiple ways, on multiple levels, multiple dimensions. This has been checked and cross-checked. And when people hear that, they just feel more secure that we're in good hands with this. Our church is handling this well, handling it wisely, handling it industriously. They're handling it in a way that we can rest and feel secure that, this church is striving to do the right thing. Um, that's why I say we're just better served sometimes to go further than we would if we were just striving to say, is this excessive? I think for Wesley, in terms of integrity, there is no really going too far. With integrity, you're always better served to err on the side of caution. You really are. And there's an instance in our own book of Doctrines and Disciplines where something of that magnitude is separated into two governing bodies of the church, just to ensure that each side checks and cross checks one another.
Thank you.
Any others that you have this evening? We have reached our finish line once again, and it has indeed been a pleasure. I hope you can see how we came full circle from where we started 4 weeks ago. And I hope that one thing you're already beginning to see and talk about in your churches is that these groups are so much more than just getting business done, crossing things off a list and going through our routines. Wesley believed that these moments were indeed sacred and that they're formative and transformative, and all the ways in which we are being vessels for the Lord's calling and for the Lord's mission. It is indeed consecrated and sacred work, and we're being formed as people, both personally and communally. And that's why in all of these various groups, whatever you're serving, in whatever form it might take, whether you're on the leadership in your church, whether you're council, whether you're nominations team, SBRC, trustees, finance, any of those, or maybe multiple, uh, you are serving a sacred role in your church, and you are a vessel, you're a means of grace. And when you're taking part in the sacred work in these groups and in the conversations that they involve, it is indeed creating a legacy that's going to far outlive and outlast your lifetime. So if we can bring that horizon to what we do, these last 4 weeks will have been a success. We wanted to help imprint that on you and to give you a horizon to work from and an identity to work from so that you could deepen in your understanding of how to think about yourself when you serve in these various roles in your church. Carol, we're going to give you the curtain call tonight. We'll give you the very last question. What is on your mind this evening?
Well, I was wondering if you're going to offer this again within the next year. I've been inviting everybody on our committees. Our church is a plant. And so even though people have served on committees before. So much has changed and so much has come back to orthodoxy. I'd really like to see more of our people participate.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That's a very fine compliment. When you get a request for when you're going to do this again, that is a fine compliment, and I appreciate that. I will say that, as Dottie can attest, that we have already made plans, until we offer it again, to have all of these Zoom recordings transferred over to YouTube, so that people can watch them at their leisure, watch them at their convenience, have a record of them and use them, however they desire to. And we would certainly love to offer them again, in the form of what we're doing now. Um, but until that time, we would like to give people the resource to be able to use it as a reference. And the plan is that we're going to have these transferred over to YouTube, all 7 sessions, and people can watch them there and use them as a resource, until we offer this again, maybe along the same times next year around charge conference season. Might seem like a good time to do it again. But thank you for that. That's a wonderful affirmation. When we conceived of doing these, back in the summer, we were hoping that people would find them helpful. And I hope that you have. And I appreciate you sharing that with other people and telling them that you have gained from it, and sharing what you learned, with people around you. That's the best way to take what you've learned from this, is to live it out in your churches and to inspire these conversations in you, and to strive toward that stewardship of life that Wesley believed was so crucial to the way we live out our discipleship. It really is, fundamentally the way that we live out our discipleship. Going once, going twice. We're going to draw the curtain on church leadership and administration. Thank you again. Bless each and every one of you. I appreciate the dynamic each of you brought, and the inspiration, the questions, the reflections you brought. You took us in directions that were always unique, and it was a learning experience for all of us, including me. So thank you for that. I'm going to is Janice still with us? Janice Gill?
I am.
Yes. Janice, I'm going to get you to send us forth with a blessing tonight, if you would, friend. Send us forth with a closing prayer.
Father, we thank you for this opportunity again to learn how to be better stewards for our churches. We appreciate you sending us a good teacher, and we appreciate the fellowship of getting to know each other, and the time that we've spent studying scripture and preparing for these lessons, and everything that you've brought to us, and all the good that comes from us meeting together and being all on the same page and learning how things should be done in all our churches. We're grateful for all the many blessings you bring into our lives, and we continue to ask that you bless our churches moving forward in this new denomination. We love you, Lord. Thank you so much. Amen.
Amen.
And thank you for that. Well, I hope all or most of you are planning to sign up for my good friend Richard Booker's Missions and Evangelism, which begins this Saturday. I know that class is going to be phenomenal. Richard's just got a wonderful layout and plan for what he has designed for you over the 4 weeks in November. You will enter your Thanksgiving season walking on the clouds after you take that experience. So I hope it's a blessing to all of you. And I hope we visit you again starting in the spring when we recharge and launch forward with a whole new lineup for you beginning in February. A lot of good things to come on the horizon, and we really are excited that you're going to be a part of it. Be blessed, and don't be a stranger. If there's anything that I can offer you, don't ever hesitate to reach out, email me. You got my number. You can call me. You can text me. Whatever you'd like to do, I welcome it. I certainly encourage it. and it would be a joy. If you're ever in Goldsboro, let me know, and we can break bread together. You be blessed, my friends, and we will look forward to seeing you again real soon. Take care.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you.